viva Chango.
Papi, decile.
Que viva Chango.
Todos los días, papá.
Que viva Chango, que viva Chango, señores.
Virgen venerada y pura, Santa Bárbara bendita. Virgen venerada y pura, Santa Bárbara bendita. Nuestra oración favorita llevamos hasta tu altura.
Que viva Chango.
Que
viva Chango.
Papi, decile.
Que viva Chango, que viva Chango, señores.
Con alegría y ternura quiero llevar mi trovada allá en tu mansión sagrada, donde lo bueno ilumina, junto a tu copa divina y tu santísima espada.
Que viva Chango.
Todos los días.
Que viva Chango.
Allá, papá.
Que viva Chango, que viva Chango, señores.
En nombre de mi nación, Santa Bárbara te pido, en nombre de mi nación, Santa Bárbara te pido, que riegues con tu fluido tu sagrada bendición.
Que viva Chango.
Ago,
Que viva Chango.
ache,
Que viva Chango, que viva Chango, señores.
yo también de corazón te daré mi murmurío, con orgullo y poderío haré que tu nombre suba, y en el nombre de mi Cuba este saludo te envío.
Que viva Chango.
Papi, decile.
Que viva Chango.
Todos los días, papá.
Que viva Chango.
Que viva Chango, señores.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on another edition of the Divination Table. I'm your host, Michael Lennon, and our special guest today, Frank Rising, is an intuitive ancestral bone reader and spiritual counselor with over 20 years of working in various divination and oracle systems, pulling from the West African Sangoma, as well as southern U.S. and Appalachian styles of bone reading, along with experience in nearly 30 years of other magical systems. He offers you a unique yet deep look into your present, past, and future. So let me bring on our special guest.
Hi there.
Hello, and how are you? So good to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really good. Things are great.
I'm so happy to hear that. So now you are an ancestral bone reader.
Yes, sir, that I am.
So can you explain for our listening audience exactly what an ancestral bone reader is and does?
Well, basically put, I took the bone reading thing, the bone reading, and I put an ancestral spin on it. What I did was I put pieces in, not just for the parents, but I go 9 generations back further. So I have the parents' parents, grandparents, and then I have pieces representing the great-grandparents. And then after that, I start to go one piece for each generation. And then what I do from there is I just basically go ahead and read it out like to see who's near you and who's influencing what in what way and who's got messages for you in which way, whether they're speaking or not speaking. All the ancestors are represented by shells. So depending on how they fall, I can tell whether they're active, inactive, speaking, not speaking, and their proximity in which where they are located with situations or with like the way they talk about, what they have to say about a situation or something you're doing.
Now, when we speak about bone reading, because, I also have a bone reading set, and I've been getting into that a lot more recently, for the people that aren't familiar, can you explain what a bone reading or bone reading set actually is?
Well, it depends. Historically, the way I understand it, bone reading was done many different ways, between shoulder blades being read in the fire, or, as the early 20th century, a lot of possum bones and things like that down in the South. The way I do it is I have to give a nod to Michelle Jackson, because Michelle Jackson was the one who pretty much pointed me in that direction. And what happened was, it becomes a set. My set is 180 pieces of bones and shells and stones and roots and a few like curios, pieces of metal and things like that thrown in, little charms and whatnot. And that's pretty much what I use. But that's definitely a 20th or 21st century version, I would say, of what it's like oracle reading too, but it's heavy on bones.
Yeah, I have to give a nod to Michelle Jackson as well, because she had clarified a lot for me from her, her blog as well as her book and her insights. Because I was trying to look too deeply with the set that I had, rather than working with what I currently already do and know, and how I read in other divination systems. So I find, the bone sets to be completely different for each and every single person.
Yeah, very specialized. Even my set will change. I have a bag that I use that's the main set. It's 181 pieces, and then I also have like a what was meant to originally be a smaller set for short readings. And then I realized there really aren't, the way I do readings, there really aren't any short readings. So what I use, I allow the client to use the pieces in that secondary bag to identify certain situations that aren't in there, and a lot of them are with 180 pieces. But if they want to name a client, or they want to name like a friend or a partner or a situation or a location or a job, or they have like a question between 2 or 3 jobs, then we put pieces in to recognize what those are, and then see what becomes, see how they read and see where they come up in there.
Yeah, I find that, I think initially my first problem that I had was looking at things in what I would consider to be like a 3D map.
Right.
Because I was always, a card reader, and everything was always laying down flat. In looking at a bone set and a bone reading, literally there are layers of pieces, not just next to or touching or on top of, but underneath and squished and blended, sometimes stuck inside. Yeah, you'll see pictures that I post sometimes online, and it'll just look like a big pile of stuff, and we have to, and I never read the same way. Like me personally, whenever I look at the spread of what I've thrown, it never comes out the same way. Sometimes it's in a spiral in, a spiral out. Sometimes it's in a lightning bolt pattern. Sometimes the spirit calls to me where to start. And a lot of times I'll start with the client itself, or themselves, I should say. And with that client piece, I get one piece of information, and then that usually leads me in a direction. And you're very right about it being it's multi-dimensional, because there's so many different ways to read this stuff that literally you can almost, you can read it one way and go and spin back around on the same spread in another way and catch something you missed. And then sometimes it's really just blatantly obvious. I've found that some people, not to take anything away from anybody, but sometimes some clients, their stuff is very clear and very, very easily read. And some are just very, it's like putting a puzzle together. Yes. Really. It is. And then as far as, the pieces themselves go too, I tend to like things that I liken a lot of things to the two sides of a coin, where you'll have a heads or a tails.
many of my pieces are like that. Like they either come up, heads or tails, or positive or negative, or favorable or unfavorable, or active or non-active, or whatever. But then you can't always rely on that piece or any piece to lay a certain way. Sometimes it's laying positive facing the domestic situation and very negative facing the work situation. And then I do all my readings as conversations, not just read. I don't just sit down and tell them what's going on. I have to ask sometimes because it's interactive. And sometimes I'll see something like, for instance, where home looks okay, but yet work looks troublesome. And then I'll say, well, how's work going? And they'll say, oh boy. And then I'll say, okay, okay, hold on. And then I'll just pick it from there. And I can usually really find exactly what's going on with work. If for example.
Right. No, but I understand completely. I mean, it is such a multi-dimensional set, that can be used for pretty much anything. And
right.
One piece in itself can have so many different ways to present itself and different meanings. Like you were saying, active or not active. Sometimes they're talking, sometimes they're not talking. Sometimes they're giving advice of saying, hey, this is something you need, or this is something you need to look at from this angle rather than the current way you're looking at it.
Yeah, very much so. And the funny thing is, too, some of those pieces, they not only do they have multi-dimensional meanings, but it really starts getting heavy when you start looking at the animals, that when you start use, I say gemstones as well, too, but with certain stones and certain animal bones, you have a lot of different things. And it almost kind of becomes, you have to look at the situation or the spread, I should say, and then sort of interpret the situation. And sometimes it'll be very surprising to me as a reader what I come up with, because it's like I didn't logically see that. That spirit was obviously coming through me that addressed that situation, because me as a logical human, I wouldn't have caught that.
Right. And and it's one of these things that I love about bone reading is you are working a lot of times specifically and directly with spirits and with your ancestors. It's not just a meaning of a piece. They start out that way. But, like you and I are aware, and other bone readers, that, we present these to our ancestors. We let them know what every piece means, what every piece means when it lands a certain way, when it falls, when it's up or when it's down, or if it's on its side. Excuse me. And we give our ancestors all the information that they need on every piece so they can communicate with us. And it's not just, like I'm going to throw charms down. I love charms. I have a lot in my bone set. But they have specifically set meanings, whereas, bones are not. Yeah. And the thing also, too, with the ancestor connection, too, that I should have mentioned in the beginning was that every reading starts out with a dual, a prayer by both me and the client, where I tell the client to call in their ancestors and ask them for help and clarity and for anything they need to know to show itself. And at the same time, I'm calling in mine too, and I'm calling in the spirits I work with, which are a myriad of spirits, which also, at times, with the exception of one or two, will change. So depending on a given period of time, those spirits that I call in sometimes change. But the ancestor connection is huge. Every piece that I use goes on an ancestor altar and a spiritual altar for. There's no way for me to even tell you how long. I mean, they say I put the piece there, and then when they're ready, they tend to come to me. They tell me, go, you start using me now. It's time.